There are many polarizing issues in workplaces today because different perspectives on world events and often the differences align along ethnic, racial, and cultural lines. I'm Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership and for Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership. Today's guest has a fresh and positive approach to the work of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations. He leverages Christian values and the tenets of respect and collaboration to mobilize organizational strengths and create more effective company cultures and working relationships. So let me tell you about my guest. My guest is Dr. Cedric Williams, and he is the founder and CEO of Legacy Consulting and Research Group. He and his group provide leader development models and services to help individuals, teams, and organizations to thrive. As a licensed clinical and consulting psychologist, Dr. Williams integrates psychology for the benefit of executives and leaders in Fortune 100 companies. His services include executive and organizational assessment, executive coaching, and consulting. Dr. Williams' research interests include multicultural humility and competence, occupational thriving, and leadership. He has also served on the executive board of the American Psychological Association Society of Consulting Psychology as the DEI chairperson. In addition, for 22 years as an active duty and reserve United States Army officer, he served soldiers and families. In his book, Brick by Brick, Becoming a Clinical and Consulting Psychologist, Dr. Williams says, we don't just stumble upon careers and lives that fulfill us, we build them brick by brick. So, welcome, Dr. Williams, to the Voice of Leadership and to Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership.
Dr. Karen, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And I'm very excited about taking the time to be with you today and have a great conversation.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to it as well. As you know, you're one of my favorite people. And so I know that you'll have something really valuable to share with the community today. So let's just jump right in, okay?
Okay, sounds great.
All right, I'm going to just ask you this question since we've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion a little bit. In many organizations today, you know that a lot of DEI approaches are very adversarial. What do you think is happening in DEI work today, and how is your approach different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that some work in DE&I and organizations, some of the work can be adversarial. For the people who are facilitating it, for the people who are experiencing it, together in the group. I really do try to take the approach that this is a complex topic that is meaningful for lots of people, right? There's a lot of meaning that's part of it. There's a lot of meaning, a lot of values that are tied to it, but I don't necessarily think that it has to be adversarial. I think that even coming from the approach of like as a Christian thinking about like we're all made in the image of God, right? So like I think that for me, behind the scenes, whether that's explicit or not, that's my starting point for the way that I think about human beings. And I feel like when we are having conversations about DE&I topics, helping people to see one another and to be able to have that empathy, to be able to sit with pain, but also to enhance that distress tolerance is something that I think is really important. So I think that there's a lot of capacity building that has to happen well before you just jump into like a 2 hour session on DE&I topics, right? Like there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of exploration that I feel like is important to do with the leadership of an organization before we jump into those types of topics or those types of interventions. And so I think that initially my approach is to really be comprehensive and try to really understand what the organization is trying to solve. What are we trying to actually do? What has been done, what has worked, and really just getting an organizational x-ray before I jump in with these very targeted interventions. but starting from the point that this is an important topic, but it doesn't have to be an adversarial topic.
Yeah, that's really critical what you're saying. Sort of like laying the groundwork and preparing people for this kind of dialogue and conversation. What are some examples of, I'll say, the ingredients or steps that you might take to build that capacity?
That's a great question. I think that the starting of the steps is to be able to meet with the organizational leaders. I talk a lot about it's not just about getting executive buy-in, it's about having executive engagement. And so if you're doing something with an organization, whether it be DE&I work, learning and education workshops, trainings, executive coaching around issues related to DE&I want to make sure that I'm going to have executive engagement. And what does that mean, right? That means that we are meeting on a regular basis. It means that we are talking. I'm understanding what their hopes are for the engagement. What is their success statement, right? What would success look like in this organization? But I also get really clear about what are the success statements? What are the problem statements? What is the problem that you're hoping to solve or hoping to look at or to explore? And then what would success look like based off of your understanding of your organization? So that's one of the first things that I would do as far as procedural application of what I think is helpful. From there, I try to get a really strategic plan, right? That's really built out of understanding timelines, understanding that they are a part of this too. So it's not just me giving this to the organization and say, this is what we're doing. It's a collaborative experience that's also cross-cultural, right? And so that there's some that modeling of this is how we work together. This is how we build this together. Even in the contracting phase, like this is something that we have to do in collaboration with one another. And so really trying to model that and also making that explicit so we don't get into a place where we're compartmentalizing DE&I work. No, we are doing DE&I work even in the process of how we go about the interventions, how we talk about contractual agreements, how we talk about what you will do or what I will do. So I think it's really important to not miss steps, but also to be explicitly naming the steps as we're going along. This is a part of the components that are important.
Well, what I really like about what you said is really engaging the leadership, the line leadership, the executive leadership. And so often that's what doesn't happen. And DEI efforts are often off on the side. And that's why they're not very effective in some organizations. And also, you talked about modeling the process from beginning to end, everything that you're doing along the way. So I think those are excellent approaches. So now, once you actually get into the room, let's say with the participants, and you're doing the DEI engagement, let's say you finally gotten to that point, what is it that helps you to build safety, a sense of community, and a caring place where people can share?
I think a lot about like some of the research that's out there, even from the past, of thinking about in groups, out groups dynamics. Like we talk a lot about the Eagles and the Rattlers from that experiment, like back in the 60s at Robbers Cave, like thinking about, some people feel like that they're on the outside, and then other people might be in this group and they have these factions that might feel like that they're fighting for resources or fighting against each other in some way. And what I try to foster is a sense of interdependence with one another and exposure, right? And so I really try to help people get together and to facilitate conversations that they would have never had in a way that is very skilled and helps to build that curiosity towards other people. But I think even before we get to that point where they're interacting in that way, I really like to start with that multicultural humility and asking this question, who am I? What are my cultural identities that I hold? What are the beliefs and values that I think are important, right? That shape the way that I think, that shape the way that I interact with the world, that shape the way that I think about the world of work and what I believe about work and what I think work can do and the work environment can do for me or what it can't do. So I'm really helping people to ask those questions first. And I think that that's a piece of that multicultural humility. We all have different cultural identities, right? You named a few of mine, right? So like psychologist, soldier, my phenotype, you can look at me and see that I am a Black male. Those are part of my cultural identities. It tells a story about me, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And so helping people to ask these questions, sometimes for the very first time, of who am I and how has that shaped the way that I think, it can be very powerful and very enlightening for people who have that experience with their colleagues. And so we do try to create these very emotionally corrective experiences in the work environment that can really lead to that long-term change over time.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the multicultural humility and competence component of your work. Of course, we know about different identities, social identities we have, and the multicultural aspect. Where does the humility part fit in, and how does that relate to the competence?
Yeah, great question. So I think that the humility parts come in of really recognizing that when we start asking our questions of how I was raised and the belief structure that I had as growing up as a child, I'm a pastor's kid, right? Like growing up in my house, like, I have two pastors as my parents. This fundamentally changed the way that I think about certain things. It changed the way I think about people. It changed the way that I think about like serving others. Not even change it, but it shaped the way that I thought about serving others, the way that I thought about human beings, the way that I thought about human interaction. And so I think that the humility part is recognizing that all of these experiences that we have growing up, as a child, and some of those very formative developmental milestones and stages of our life, they help to inform the way that we are with other people at work. It takes humility to actually be able to recognize that, which builds on that competence. The way that you become more competent in, working cross-culturally is by asking those really tough questions about who you are, being very humble about who you are, and humble about the beginnings of others, right? That leads to that competence. But I don't think that that's a step that you can skip. You can't just go right into the skill. I think you have to be very introspective and really figure out, like, how has this shaped who I am? Can I think about it for a moment? And can I also acknowledge that somebody else has an experience that's similar to mine, but different? And their story is worth knowing and worth telling and worth hearing, and lots of times adjusting and accommodating for as well, right? And that's that imago Dei, like you are, I'm formed, you're formed, right? And that we're humans. And so I think that those are important steps that we don't want to skip.
When I'm hearing you talk about this, Dr. Williams, I'm thinking about humility in this sense that my own experience, whatever it may be, is not the only experience, and that humility actually increases the curiosity to find out about other people and to realize that because of whatever my identities are, there are pieces of life experience I may not have even experienced or seen or been exposed to. So it's the humility to recognize that that's the case as well, is what I'm hearing you say.
Very much so. That ability to recognize, in some language we use, like there might be blind spots. There might be blind spots of I didn't know this, or I didn't see this, or I was just unaware. I think one of the going back to that first question about, things being adversarial or not, a lot of times the conversation about DE&I think gets adversarial because we equate these biases that people have with them now being bad people and bad persons. It's like, no, we all have biases, right? And we have to learn the skills to be able to self-regulate our biases and to be able to interact and push through, because there's more complexity than just the biases that we have from that. Some people might call it reptile brain, or, functioning on your amygdala, whatever it may be. These biases inherently make us like bad people. It's trying to figure out, how are these getting in the way of me connecting? And I don't see DE&I work as being meant to disconnect people. I see it as built to connect others to the story, to the narrative, to their own but also to the narrative and the story of others.
I think that's very well said. And I think often when DEI efforts fail, it becomes us against them. I'm right and you're wrong, as opposed to the kind of exploration that you've been talking about here. So thank you so much for how you're explaining it and also for the work that you do, which leads me to another question I want to ask you about, because in recent years, as you know, we've been in the midst of escalating tensions between the police and particularly the Black community, often resulting in a lot of unnecessary deaths, to the point where some have even called for efforts to defund the police. And in your case, you chose to provide consulting to police forces. So tell us about your work with police and fire departments and how you're making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like no secret, in my work, in the work that I do at DEI, multicultural competence and humility spaces, that I work with first responders. I feel like the first responder community, if anything, there is something that can be mutually beneficial in this interaction. And I think that those structures, those organizations, those first responder communities, it's important for them to be able to understand equity, understand inclusive practices. And because I don't demonize them, right, it helps me to be able to see them too. See them so you can also see me, right, as a Black male. And to be able to have these like very meaningful moments with those communities has been something that I've deeply valued. Like I love my work with the police departments. I love my work with the fire departments. Being able to talk and have these extremely honest conversations, especially during the time of George Floyd's murder in 2020, 2021, 2022. It was kind of at a height of so many tensions, whether it be with the pandemic, election angst. I mean, there were so many things that were going on for people. Instead of saying defund the police, like I think that there is a way to be able to go into those structures and to see that there can be change that happens in a way that is collaborative and not in a way that is just defunding. I don't want the police to be defunded. That doesn't make it, for me, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute to me. I understand that there is a need for alternative ways to work with people who have mental health issues, like on recalls. Like that makes sense to me, of like, is there something else that we can be doing to be able to save lives? But I also think that there has to be some sort of collaboration. I don't think that what we want is to have a society that feels like we're always against in order to have progress. Like I think that there's a way for us to be able to move forward together. And I think that that's a fundamental belief in a value of mine, is to be collaborative in our efforts towards change, and to be able to link arms and to be able to sit with one another and to see the humanity that we both hold. And I think that that's slow work at times, but things like 2020, 2021, I think it speeds up that process. And, we're continuing to see some of the ramifications of that. And I think in a positive way, like there needs to be reform. In the same way, there needs to be collaboration in order to get reform. And so I try to be, at the tip of the spear in that, to be able to help out the best way that I can.
Absolutely. And as you know, we both share the view that defunding the police is not the answer. And so I really appreciate the fact that you decided to jump in there and actually provide some services in a
Yeah.
collaborative way where there's mutual learning.
Mhm.
And you demonstrate it first. You see the police, then it's an invitation for them to see you and to learn from your perspectives and what you've seen as well. And you're learning together. I think that that's really a very healthy way to move in these spaces. And so I applaud you for the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having as people are reforming and considering new and different approaches for how they will move forward. So that's really phenomenal. I know that you talk a lot about a concept that's organizational thriving. What is organizational thriving from your perspective? And what are some examples that you have from the work that you've done, just working with organizations in general, how you've helped them to thrive? What does it look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like the word thriving from, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who write on thriving, thinking about like Dr. Pam King, and she talks a lot about flourishing and thrive, who's out at Fuller Theological Seminary, Fuller Graduate School of Psychology, Marriage and Family Therapies, colleague. I like her work. I also like the work of Christine Porth. When I think about thriving, one of the things I like about Christine Porth's work is looking at vitality and learning. So if there is a sense of vitality within an individual or within an organization, and there's ongoing learning and vigor, that is an outcome of a thriving organization, is that there is a lot of learning, there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of connectivity, there's a lot of ability to be able to flourish and to be able to give back, right? To give back to the people that they're serving, their clients, the people within the organization, and the communities around them too. And so I think that for us in our workout legacy, we really do try to help people to move towards occupational thriving in a variety of different ways. A lot of the work that we're doing with people is really setting up some pretty robust like learning and education opportunities to be able to think about this out loud with one another, to really get a baseline of not just like leader development, but character development. There's a lot of things about leadership, which I think are important, but one of my favorite things, just even the last 3 years of working at the United States Military Academy in the summers as a reservist, teach a course there called Psychology for Leaders in the Behavioral Sciences and Leadership Department. And when I first came in, I was amazed at how much emphasis at West Point is really focused in on character development. Like I mean, I have been in the military for a long time. We talked about character for a long time, but it's the character formation within organizations that is so helpful. So if you're helping people to really think about building and being people of character, that's a leadership skill that I think a lot of people just don't, maybe they just don't get, in organizations. But focusing in on that, I think is a precursor to that thriving, that vitality, that learning, that vigor. It's really starting off at a baseline and saying, what type of people do we want to be before we decide what we're going to do? Who do we want to be? Who do we want our organization to be for others into the world? And to me, that's a worthwhile and noble effort, right, to lean into. And so I think for us at Legacy, like we're asking that question as well. Like, who do we want to be as an organization as we help other people figure out who they want to be?
I think that's very powerful because you're starting from what I'll call the inside out. And deciding who you want to be also taps into this whole notion of the values that are important, to you and the values that you want to live, whether individually and also as organizations. That's like the foundation and the precursor to the organizational thriving that you describe. And you mentioned this character formation and the military connection and being at West Point and so on and so forth. So say a little bit more about what you learned in the military and tell us a little bit about what you did in the military, first of all, and then the lessons you learned that you're still applying today.
All right. Yeah, I'd be happy to share a little bit. Like for one, like I really enjoy my time in the military. It's been like quite the journey, and I'll try to keep the question as brief as possible because I feel like I can talk about this sort of stuff all day and like lessons learned and things that I've kind of gathered over the last couple of years. I will say that like the military for me, I have met some of the greatest human beings that I've ever encountered in my time in service. And this is what, right? Like of like the people that you meet inside of the military, they're the type of people that you want to be around. Like they're the type of people that are like, gosh, I want to be like you in your character, your work ethic, like those type. And so that's really what's kind of kept me in the military for these 22 years is like the people, the human beings, the people that you're serving, the people that you're working with, like they're wonderful people. I do like a mission and purpose focused organization. So it's nice being a part of that as well. And I believe in the mission of the work that we're trying to do. I came in the military, 9/11 was my senior year of high school. And so I can remember being in economics class, with a friend of mine who I had known since junior high, high school. We had played sports together. We're watching, the Twin Towers fall. And then a couple months later, we find ourselves in the same company for basic training in airborne school because we enlisted together, right? Left the same day and did all that type of thing, became teammates once again. And I think that for me, the catalyst for, of course, the catalyst was from 9/11 to join the military, but what kept me was really the people. And you get inside and you really want to serve and be a part of this community that is trying to serve others, trying to do the best that they can in this world that we live in. And of course, like there's flaws to any kind of organization, and the military is not void of those as well. But for the most part, I would say it's the human beings that you're serving. Really, it was my time in the military that was the catalyst for me to become a psychologist, a deployment. And so I can go into that, or I can pause too.
Well, let me first ask you this because one of the things I know that's important to you is that this notion of treating every soldier as someone who might save your life. Talk about that a little bit.
I had a battle buddy, a guy who I care deeply about, a good friend of mine. His name is Jason Anthony Riley. He was the one that introduced me to that topic. He's a Marine. I don't hold that against him, but we were talking one day about like business, and he said something along those lines, and it might be out there, so I don't remember like this like a quote from somebody, but you want to treat every person like that, they, especially in the military, like that they could be the one that saved your life, right? Because you never know. I can remember in 2004 being on a deployment to Iraq. I mean, as an infantryman, like, so I've been, my entire time in the military has been in the infantry, right? So I was active duty enlisted infantry. And then I switched over later on to go into the reserve component and commission and do all of that sort of stuff, but stayed in the infantry. And what I've realized is that the infantry has strata from all different walks of life. You have people who are like, from very wealthy families, very poor families, every race, religion, creed, and you have to figure it out. And so there's gonna be long periods of time where you're in the trenches together, you're literally in the ground or on the top of a mountain, or you're in the Everglades in Florida, like whatever it may be, you're with one another. And I think that you have to rely on each other, and you have to get to know each other because you're in those close quarters for long periods of time. And it breeds a sense of curiosity. For me, it did. And a sense of humility, of understanding like, wow, like I would have never had the opportunity to meet this person if I didn't get outside of my comfort zone, enlist, right? And then also put myself and volunteer for these spaces that were continually dangerous in some ways. And so that has been a really special, special opportunity to be able to serve all this time. I'm really grateful for it.
You really just described your whole process for diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of how you engage the military. The whole notion of being humble and curious about people and appreciating the fact that you got to meet some people you otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to meet. And so you're still practicing even what you were doing,
Yeah.
back then in the Army. It's really an example of recognizing that we all interact together and need each other. I'm thinking you and I are both Army people.
Yeah.
However, we need the Marines, the Air Force, and all the rest of them, the Navy as well. And so recognizing the person who might save you might not be an Army person, it might be somebody else. And that's valuable too. So I really appreciate the way you just shared that and talked about it. And you were alluding to a few minutes ago this whole notion about your inspiration for becoming a psychologist, and that's also rooted in your military experience. So tell us about that too.
I briefly touch on this in my book as well, but I can go into a little bit more depth. So the person that I talked about earlier, that I was sitting, in economics class, and then I went and enlisted in the Army, went to airborne school, infantry school together. His name is Matthew Thomas Ronquillo. And, we've known each other since junior high. We were on the same, sports teams and stuff growing up. When I was on a deployment in 2004, he was just coming back from his deployment. He was stationed at the time it was Fort Bragg, which is now Fort Liberty. And he had gotten into a car accident, and I didn't find out about it until days later because I was deployed, right? And I was in Baghdad at the time, found out that, Matt was killed. And it was devastating, right? It was like really devastating. And then about 2.5 weeks later, I was, eating a meal with another soldier. And then later on that day, there was a group of us eating a meal, sharing a meal, kind of laughing, kind of cutting up. And then later on that day, into the night, he was killed. His name is Staff Sergeant Rene Ledesma. And so that was May 15th of 2004. And I can remember 3 days later at his memorial service, I was the guidon bearer for my company, for my troop. And then so I remember going to the memorial service, walking back to the barracks, going on top of the little building and just writing in my journal, right? Like, just like, man, like this is trying to like understand, like, this is like in those moments you're like, God, like, what is going on here? Like, what are we doing? What is this about? And it was in that moment that I was like, one day I would love to be a psychologist. And I wrote that in my journal that day, May 18th, 2004. And I think from then on, it was just a process of discovery for me. I would rummage through all these books that they would send in these care packages, like when you're deployed, they would send care packages of like books and snacks and things like that. So I started like reading all these psychology books, trying to answer questions about human suffering, human pain, human behavior, which really led me deeper and deeper into this interest into this field of psychology. And that was the catalyst. That was the catalyst. These two really traumatic events led me into the field of psychology. I wanted to be in spaces where I knew like not everybody's going to come and like sit on a couch and like talk therapy. Like that's not for everyone, right? But people do go to work. And so as soldiers at that time, like we didn't really have like, it's not like you have like lots of therapists around, like, you're just kind of like going back to work and doing the thing and going back on a mission or going on a raid or going on a patrol, whatever it may be. That's what you're doing. And so I wanted to be able to be a psychologist. So eventually I would be able to go to people who would otherwise not necessarily walk inside of a therapy room. But how can we take these psychological principles that I think really do help people where they were at? And if that means that they're at the work environment, then I'm going to take these psychological principles and bring them to the work environment to help people to live more functional, more regulated lives. That's really what I've been doing.
So these very significant losses that you experienced, very shocking and sudden, also, this is what prompted you to think about how psychology could make a difference and how you could make a difference as a psychologist in the workplace.
Yeah.
And if you had had those services though at that time, how do you envision they would have helped you?
Yeah, good question. So, and I think, and to be fair, I can remember when Matt was killed, my platoon sergeant at the time, I remember, like I said, it was days later. So like I can remember getting the email from my dad and just kind of like running out and just like kind of like in shock. And my platoon sergeant at the time, he recognized that I was distraught. And I think that Sergeant Jennings, when he just was caring and supportive, he was like a huge, tough guy, tough infantry soldier. But man, I mean, he was just like in that moment, he was like a teddy bear, right? Like he was like one of those guys that's like could cry on and with. And I found a lot of guys in my platoon. We were able to share this moment, and it was really special and safe. To say that there wasn't any care, I think that there was care for the best way that we knew how to care. And even that little bit was sustaining enough. And I think I had even like taken a day off or so and got some rest as well. But yeah, I mean, just even that peer-to-peer support in those moments was very transformative and meaningful. There was no shame in it. We had all been experiencing a lot of loss. And so for there not to be a moment of shame when there was grief that was, normal and natural, it was powerful. And honestly, it deepened my appreciation for the people that I was serving with. And honestly, it invigorated me to want to do more for them as well.
I think that's really powerful what you were just saying about the peer-to-peer support. A lot of our work when we go into organizations, including military organizations, is to develop capacity within those organizations in order to provide the care and the service to each other because there's only so many of us who are psychologists. We're not going to be around all the time. So our job really is building those skills inside the organization too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a great point, Dr. Karen, because, I think a lot of times when we go inside of these organizations, like the goal is not to like have Dr. Williams here for the next 50 years, right? Like that's not helpful for them. And like you said, there's only one or 15 or 12 of us on our team and our consultants and coaches, but like there's hundreds of thousands in this organization. So being able to help them to see what they can do, how much they can do, and to build that capacity within the organization. I mean, that's the thing that I love when they can, come, that light bulb goes on of like, this is something that we can do, and we've co-created this change or this policy or this structure that allows them to be sustaining over, a period of time. That's the joy of the work. Yeah, I think that the goal as a good consulting psychologist is to continue to work yourself out of doing everything within the organization. You should do everything within the organization, right? You should partner with the organization and figure out what they can do and to work with them. And so I think that that's important. It's a great point.
Absolutely. And you and I both know that the field of psychology is very diverse and there are lots of ways to serve. And we've been talking about your consulting company. We've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the work you do there, creating thriving organizations. I know that you've also served as a professor. So tell us about other ways that you've served in the field of psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think that's one of the joys, like, as a psychologist, you do have an opportunity to be really diverse, right? And to go into a lot of different domains. So I do a lot of consulting psychology work within teams and organizations and coaching, executive coaching and consultation. But I've also been able to teach and to be able to, direct a program at Fuller Theological Seminary, Fuller Graduate School of Psychology and Marriage and Family Therapy, which is the place that I went and got my PhD from. And to be able to go back into that community and serve in some capacity has been really important. Being able to, to cultivate a clinician consultant training model there that I think is really important, of really teaching people who are more clinically trained how to be consultants in different spaces, whether it be mental health consultancy or an organizational consultancy. That's been something that we've been able to focus in on in the program. It's been a joy. There's some wonderful people there at Fuller, which has been great. It's been a great opportunity to serve. And I really do like the integration of psychology and theology. Sometimes with my corporate clients, that's not going to come out explicitly, right? Per se. Sometimes, like, there are explicit components, like when it comes to certain clients, like whether we're working with churches or we work with like, an executive who has wants to talk about spiritual issues. Like even just today, earlier today, I was meeting with an executive from a venture capital that we've been working with for years. And, we had a conversation about faith and integration, and it was extremely normal and natural and integrating. And I think that at Fuller, what I love is that is what we do, is that integration piece. Because I think that spirituality, just in general, is becoming more and more important for people. People are curious about how to integrate their faith in the way that they think about making business or ethical decisions. And so I don't see these as being like so separate. I think that it's embedded in a lot of the work that we're doing. So I love that part of teaching at Fuller. And then for the last 3 years, as a reservist, I've been able to teach at the United States Military Academy at West Point, teach a course called PL 100, Psychology for Leaders. It's at the end of their first year of their freshman year at the academy. And honestly, I mean, the students, the cadets there they're incredibly sharp. Like they're just brilliant human beings, phenomenal people. And it's just a joy to be able to be around them, be a part of that community. I feel like every single time I'm out there, I'm just like trying to keep up, right? Like, I mean, they're just like with the other faculty and the students alike. It's just a great place. So I've been really blessed and fortunate to have the opportunity to be out there for the last 3 years, and it's been a good experience. So that's my teaching experience, and so it's been I'm honored to be able to have done that.
Hearing you talk about West Point, of course, brings back wonderful memories for me because it was a joy to work with the cadets when I was stationed there many years ago as the clinical director of the Cadet Counseling Center. And you're
Yeah.
right. I mean, working with really bright, intelligent, forward-thinking people is inspiring. It
Yeah.
makes the work a joy. And so I think when we're in the academic area, another thing that occurs to me is seeing young people to be so engaged and say, there are good people out there. So our future is secure in some ways that maybe we might not always think it is, because a lot of times those who are causing issues get a lot of attention and not necessarily those who are really doing some great work.
You talk about like the best and the brightest. I mean, there's just some amazing human beings. One of the parts that I really loved about working at West Point, like part of their class project, is that they would write a paper. In this paper, it was kind of like a narrative paper. It kind of talks about like a leadership struggle or things that they're going through and like kind of how they've overcome it. And I would find myself like the first year, I was just like, it was, I would like several times I would pick up the paper and I would just like have to like set it down and just like, I cannot believe an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old just wrote this paper. Like it was just so well done. Yeah. Like, and I'm not talking about just like the grammar, but I mean, even though that was like pretty good too, but it's the content. It's like what they're trying to accomplish. Like you can see it after this like whole year of them being at the academy. It's like, wow, like these people are really being formed in a way that is they're trying to go somewhere and they're trying to be leaders of character. I think it's really admirable, right? Because these types of people, of course, are going into the military, but they're going to go well beyond. Like not everybody, the 1,000 people that graduate, or come into that class, like some of them will serve for 8 years. Some might serve for 20, but a lot of them are going to go into organizations and do a lot of things all across the world. So it's just neat just to see the depth and the content of some of the cadets and the students. Yeah, our future is bright.
Let's talk about your book, Brick to Brick. Tell us about the book and why you wrote it.
Being a first generation professional, this is like a book that I wish that like somebody had written like when I was like in school, right? Like as a psychology student, because the book is really a process of me trying to understand what it was happening. So I like started writing this book when I was in grad school and I was meeting with clients and having these like significant experiences with these clients. It's like I'm a student, but I'm their therapist. And they're coming in with all of these things that are going on in their lives. To me, it was really meaningful and very humbling that I was in this position to be their clinician. And I feel like they taught a lot, like their stories, their narratives. They were also teaching me and as I was learning in school. But there was a lot of things that were kicking up inside of me in this process of being in grad school and initially not feeling like I belonged, right? Like, or asking that question, like, do I actually belong here? Like, am I just like an infantry guy who just like kind of stumbled upon something? Or like, how did this really happen? Right. But really sticking with it and learning and trusting the process, meeting good people, meeting great mentors. It just inspired me to say, I would love to write something for future psychologists, for future, people who are doing in the helping profession, to be able to say, like, this is kind of what it's like. Here's some things to be thinking about as you become a clinical and consulting psychologist. And so the focus is more on people who are in the helping profession, but I put reflective questions in it for anybody who's building a life, right, or building a career. Like, there's questions at the back of every chapter for the reader to be able to engage their own setting, their own life, whether you're a business person, a marketing person, a nurse, or whatever it may be, having an opportunity to reflect on your own becoming and what are you building. And I think Brick by Brick was intentional of like really trying to think like you have to start small and you build upon what you have. And for many people, like myself or a first generation professional, like sometimes that's hard because you don't necessarily have a blueprint, but hopefully that this can be a mentor and a guide for others who read it.
I really thank you. I really like the fact that the book is relevant no matter what career a person might be going in, because you're inviting them to do some self-exploration and to really think about where they're starting and how they're building. So say a little bit more too about what are some lessons, general lessons in the book that would apply to anyone, whether
Yeah.
they're a psychologist or not.
Yeah. Some general lessons that I think, one, I think I emphasize this a lot is like finding a good community that you can travel with, people who are with you and who are for you. And I kind of talk about that throughout the book of different people who I met along the way who were supportive, finding good mentors, but also trying to perfect your craft. Like one of the things that I think it just really helped me was when I was in grad school, I met with like 30 psychologists. I was like cold calling people in the Los Angeles area, like, can I have an hour of your time and just learn what you do? Some of them were private practice, some of them were consulting psychologists, some of them were research psychologists, some of them were neuropsychologists. I was trying to hone in on what I thought was like the best career trajectory. And I would say that that practice, whether you are a cook, whether you are a nurse, whether you are an engineer, finding people who do generally what you think that you're going to be doing and having conversations about what they do in their workday and what that looks like was invaluable. And I feel like that's something that is that lifelong learning that I feel like it's very transferable across different domains. So that's one thing that I think from the book that can be really helpful. Another thing that I talk about is like, what do you do when you have distractions? You might call them distractions when life happens. Like, for instance, I actually went to the United States Army Ranger School when I was in grad school, right? So I had an opportunity to go, like, it was always something that I wanted to do, but it was the timing could not have been worse, right? I was 30 years old when I went to Ranger School, which is like not ideal, right? I had two kids and I'm in grad school. And I talk about being a human being who happens to be in grad school rather than just being a graduate student who happens to be a human being, right? And that there are certain things in life, like you do it. There's a backstory of why I did what I did, which I explain a little bit, like about my father and that who had passed away. That and I just talk about other distractions that had come up, or I call them distractions, but they're not really distractions. They're just you living life and having these experiences where you get to apply all the things that you've learned in a way that might not always be convenient, but it takes you to a different level. I think that there's some life lessons in there that are really helpful.
I have the feeling that what you call distractions are really part of life lessons. Continuing our whole journey includes all the experiences that we have along the way, and we wouldn't even be who we are without those. And so it creates a rich fabric so that we're not just one dimensional, we're multidimensional in our journey. So, yeah, thank you for sharing about the book. And how can people get the book?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to get the book. Thank you. You can go right off of Amazon and order it. It's Brick by Brick by Dr. Cedric Williams. Or you can visit formationpublishing.com. And that's my whole entire, my website at Formation Publishing Press. And then there's a link there for the book. There's a link to book opportunities to speak. That's the two places that are available for purchase.
Great. And you mentioned speaking. Say a little bit more about what kind of topics you like to speak on. Who is a great audience for you? In other words, who should contact you for speaking engagements? Tell us a little more about that.
I do quite a bit of work with speaking along the lines of like thinking about leadership, thinking about quiet leadership, thinking about introverts who are in leadership positions. I do a lot of work on multicultural humility, talk a lot about that, but I try to really integrate those, right? Thinking about leader development and then multicultural competence, leadership, being an introvert, and really trying to help people who don't fit the archetype to really live into this piece of like, no, you can be the leader that you need to be in that organization, and trying to partner with as many executives or senior leaders as possible. So I think that the type and the demographic, I mean, we speak to all different groups. We speak to small groups, we speak to large groups, executives, we do retreats, we do offsites. We've had large auditoriums, but I try to be very experiential with the learning and education that we provide. And so we do, like standalone times and, just to do speaking. But our hope is that we come inside of an organization and really be comprehensive of what we would like to do and how they would like to see change within their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the speaking engagement, they're hiring you for that because there's something they want to accomplish. And
Exactly.
usually you have to do more than the speaking in order to accomplish those objectives. So that makes perfect sense. And again, that website where you have your book is also where they can book you for speaking. Would you say that again in any other way that you would like for people to contact you?
Yeah, the best ways is through www.formationpublishing.com or www.legacycrg.com. Our group is called Legacy Consulting and Research Group. You can find me there in order to book. We have a great support team that gets all that information to me. I'm happy to work with a lot of different organizations, and like we love doing this work. Like we're not great at like marketing. So like that's like the one thing. It's like we need to get better at that, but we really do love being able to partner with different organizations and to do some really good work and to co-create positive change together.
Well, I can certainly say this. I have heard you speak multiple times, and anyone who books you as a speaker will be blessed because your content is very positive. It's also practical, and it's what we need in our world today. So I will give that endorsement right now for anybody who's even thinking about
Yeah.
retaining you as a speaker. So, as we're wrapping up right now, what are your additional words of wisdom for the
Mhm.
community here of executive business leaders?
I would just say for executive business leaders, like one thing that I've really continued to think about recently is that as executive leaders, you have to find people and surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth and who will not be intimidated by your position, intimidated by your influence and your authority within the organization. But you find people that you can trust that will tell you the truth. Sometimes I think that that's a form of like, peer groups. Sometimes I think it's in the form of executive coaches and consultants who can walk with you and through some of the hardest parts of your work. But I think that that's critical. It allows for accountability. It allows for trust to be built and a modeling of collaboration. So that's probably the thing that I've been thinking about the most recently, is finding people who will tell you the truth, no matter your authority and influence within the organization.
Well, that's really profound and important because, as Jesus said, it's the truth that will set you free. So, very, very important. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for being here with me today on The Voice of Leadership and Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership. I appreciate everything that you've shared with the community today.
Dr. Karen, thank you for your time. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a joy, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
You are welcome. And we will close the show today with a scripture reading that comes from Philippians, the second chapter. And I'll start with the first verse. And it says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like minded, having the same love, being of one accord of one mind, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. And to those of you listening today, I think you heard from Dr. Williams all the ways and approaches that they look out for the interests of others and use that whole spirit of humility to make a difference. So Be blessed as you apply those same principles to your life and business today. Thank you. Hi, this is Dr. Karen, and I'm here today with Jos Snoop, who is the CEO and president of the Bible League. And the Bible League is a ministry that provides Bibles and instructional materials in the Word of God, as well as trains teachers in their local language and culture to share the Word of God and to disciple people. So today, Jos, tell us a little bit about the impact of the Bible League. What's going on out there?
Last year, I met this lady. Her name was Nimia. Nimia was born in 49. She became a Christian in 2002. And last year, we were able to invite her in one of our trainings. At the end of that meeting, she stood up and shared her testimony. She said, "This is the first time I received a Bible for my own, and I'm equipped to share the Word of God with others." I thought by myself at that point, that's why we are a Bible League. That's why God called us to be in ministry, to serve people like that and to equip them with the right materials and with the Word of God.
Oh, thank you so much, Jos, for sharing that story. And what I want to let everyone know is you can be a part of this movement as well. You can go to BibleLeague.org to find out more about the ministry and also to donate to the ministry. There are lots more stories like the one that Jos just shared today about lives that are changed and impacted for God through Jesus Christ. Hi, this is Dr. Karen, and today I'm here with Terrence Chapman, who is the president and CEO of Victorious Family and also the author of Do Your Children Believe? Victorious Family has a goal of reaching 9.2 million families by 2030. Terrence, tell us, how far along are you on that goal?
Well, we're very excited. Last year, for example, we reached 133,800 families, and prior to that, so we're right on around the 400,000 family mark towards our 9.2 million goal in the second year, really in a year and a half. So we're extremely excited.
That is very, very exciting news. And I know that it's many new initiatives that help you to reach even more families. So tell us what's new in the ministry.
You know, what's exciting, in December 7th of 2023, we had a national newspaper cover Victorious Family, and it went throughout the country. And that has exposed us to over 30 million families in the US. From that, we've got a great deal of responses. And one of those responses is a new partnership that we're forming with Hampton University to come alongside of them and work in 8 counties in the Hampton Roads area. So we're real excited about that. Millions of families will be exposed to what does it look like to have family transformation taking place in their home.
That's phenomenal. So how can people reach you and how can they reach your weekly resource that you have as well?
Well, they can reach us at victoriousfamily.org, victoriousfamily.org. Our resources are there. And we're excited because we have a brand new resource that just came out. It's our weekly rhythms guide. It really gives the parent and individual kind of a day-to-day rhythm and how they might walk in Christ. And so we really would encourage that they get a copy of our weekly rhythms guide for parents and individuals.
Thank you so much, Terrence. I'm so glad that you're here with me today. And to you out there in the audience, please go to victoriousfamily.org, donate to the ministry, get the weekly rhythms guide, and see what else is new in the ministry. See you next time. You've been listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. And I want to give a special thanks to jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan for granting us permission to use his gifted music on our show. Thanks for listening, and remember to go to my website, transleadership.com, for more strategies, insights, and leadership resources.